This is the Living in Mid-Bloom podcast, lighthearted and heartfelt conversations about what it looks like to live, heal, and blossom in middle age. I'm your host, April Pruitt. Let's get our bloom on. Hello, my mid-bloomers. I am very happy today to interview someone I met in the past couple of months. Her name is Beth Tyson, and she is a childhood trauma consultant. She is director of trauma-informed practices at Connect Our Kids. She is EMDR certified therapist. I'm not sure what the CASA volunteer is. What does that stand for?
So I'm a CASA volunteer, which means that I am a court-appointed special advocate for 2 children in the foster care system.
Okay. So does that mean you follow them through the years, or is it
Yes.
for a period of
Yes.
time?
Yes. So I've began with them when their case first opened, and I follow them all the way through until it closes. Right now, they've been in the foster care system for 5 years.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I know that your career did not start in this field. And one, I'm curious about what you were doing prior. And then I want to focus on what made you make this major change in your life.
Sure. And thank you for having me here today with your guests and your audience.
Absolutely.
So let's see. I was in corporate America, working a 9 to 5 typical office type setting. I moved around between human resources and marketing, and I did some executive assistant work with like supporting a CEO. So I kind of tried a bunch of different things in the business world and in corporate America, and I just felt extremely unfulfilled.
Why did you go into the field? I'm curious, did you get a degree in business or?
Right. No, actually, I didn't. I had a degree in communications and psychology, but I really didn't know what to do with it. I think when you're young and you're in your early 20s, like you're still figuring so much out about yourself and about the world. And I really didn't know what opportunities were out there for me. And I didn't have a ton of guidance other than like, go and make money. It was like, get a good job, make money.
Go forth and conquer.
Right. And corporate jobs is just with a college degree. That's kind of was just like the next step. So I applied to some, right after my graduation with my bachelor's degree, I applied for some office positions, and I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I worked for Lincoln Financial, and then eventually PNC Bank. So like I was in the financial world mostly. And I just, like I said, I just found it like a waste of my day. I just really didn't like what I was doing. I felt no real purpose. I felt no passion or calling towards that work.
And I have to laugh because I was in the financial field too.
Oh, it's so boring.
And it kills your soul.
Yes, it does, especially for people like us. Like some people love it, I think, or else they, might not do it either. But for me, it was soul crushing. I was like, I can't take one more moment of this. I think it was a day where I spent an entire beautiful day indoors in a conference, like a large conference, like expo type place where I was manning a booth. And I thought to myself, I just wasted an entire beautiful day of my life without any windows, without anything I cared about. I was like, I can't do this forever. So that was going on in the back of my mind, but I really didn't have the courage or the bravery to do it until I lost my mom suddenly. My mom passed away suddenly when I was 26. And
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. So
it's a young age when you're still figuring things out,
Yeah. We spent a lot of time together too. She was very young at heart. And so we would hang out like friends almost. Yeah. So, she was dating, I was dating, we were just in a similar, a similar space. We'd go out dancing together and, it was so fun.
I love that.
Yeah. We were like kindred spirits in that way. But after she died suddenly, it really made me realize that I could not waste one more moment of my life doing something that I didn't feel passionate or purpose for. And so once of course that was a traumatic experience for me. And so I went through therapy and I made my mistakes and I did all the things. And then, but once I started to come out of the grief, I was able to get back to school. I went back.
You can see things more clearly,
Yes, absolutely.
The best thing you could have done is, okay, I need some help here.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks don't, or they think, well, I guess I shouldn't be so upset, or, well, it's been a year now, I should be okay. But
Mhm.
that's really other people talking at you because they don't want to see your grief. They don't want to know your grief.
Oh,
But I
yeah.
give you credit for making major change in your life. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it really was a gift in a way. Not the gift that, not the motivation you really want, but looking back, if I can find anything good that came out of her early death, it was that it motivated me to make a change and go back to graduate school and get my degree in clinical counseling, which has been
Wow.
the passion of my life. So it was a good decision for me.
It's a little scary, I would think, in some ways, because you're not getting the income. Or were you still working and going to school? Or
Yes. So
okay,
it's
yeah.
usually like a 2 or 3 year program, but I did it part time at night. And this was back when you had to be in class actually, and it wasn't online.
Oh yeah.
I was working in the city in Philadelphia, and I would hop on a train or I would drive out to my school, which was out in the suburbs, a couple times a week for classes. So sometimes I wouldn't be home till 10:30, quarter to 11 at night after working, 9 to 5 all
Long
day
days.
long.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a lot, but you know what? When
Yeah.
you really want something, you'll do it, and
Yeah, you're right. You're
you'll
right.
find a way. You'll find a way.
Yeah. I always feel that I'm more afraid of something I didn't do
Mm,
and missing that opportunity. And I have a lot of anxiety and some fears, and it's a real push to kind of get through things, but I have to think about it in my head. So what do I want out of my life? Then don't make this thing so fearful. But again, I give you kudos for making this major change in your life.
thank you.
And I think that's encouraging to people too, that it can happen. You can do it.
Yeah. I was 10 years out of undergraduate school when I decided to go back for my master's degree. So, but there were other people in my program that were older than me and obviously people younger than me, but I didn't feel that out of place. So, especially now with online, if you really want to make a change and do
Hmm.
something meaningful with your life, they make it a lot more accessible now than it was even a decade ago.
When did you actually start working in this new field?
It was 2013 I graduated, and I immediately started working for a nonprofit organization. At the time, it was called Robin's Nest, and now it's called Ascenda Integrated Health. And that was in New Jersey. And what they were doing is they provide all different types of services to children and families across the state of New Jersey. But the department I worked for was the foster kinship and adoptive program. And so they hired me to be an in-home therapist for children who were, in the foster care system or were being raised by a grandparent or had been adopted but were struggling with mental health issues. And my role and my purpose was to try and stabilize those families and prevent another disruption, prevent a child from being removed from their home. It was pretty intense at times.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was,
So I suppose you get a file and details
yep.
about the situation.
Mhm.
So going in, I'm sure there's a set of rules that you have to abide by or things you have to document that you see that maybe aren't good. Now, I was just looking at your resume. So it said you had 30 plus clients at one time.
Mhm.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh. How often were they supposed to be seen by you?
Once a week. Yeah.
Monday through Friday, let's see, 5 or 6. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
They really put new counselors right to the fire, I mean, they put the youngest and the most fresh out of school counselors with the most high need populations, and it's really backwards, right? I mean, although I
Yeah.
learned a lot and I wouldn't change it for the world and I loved what I did, it was definitely somebody who had more experience would have been able to better serve those families. And unfortunately, we do things a little backwards. We put our least experienced people with the people who have the most needs. And so that work
Yeah,
was really
that doesn't make any
transformative.
sense.
No, it doesn't. But
I mean, I figure the systems across the country are all overloaded.
they are.
That's a lot. So you did that for a couple of years. Was it burnout?
Oh, yeah. Like even my supervisor would say after 2 years, she would start transitioning people in my role to the next thing because you just can't stay in it long term without, it really taking a toll on you. Now, I wasn't ready at that point to go. I loved seeing the children and that even despite how much they had been through, the strength that they had and the love between the foster parents, the kinship and adoptive parents for the children, even though there were so many struggles. And what I saw was just such deep commitment to these children and wanting what was best for them, but just being unable to understand the trauma behaviors and the trauma responses that were happening. So when I spent more time with the parents, educating them about childhood trauma and how it impacts the body and the brain than I did actually therapy with the children. Because once the adult who's the primary caregiver, the person that's with the child the most, they will have the most impact on the child, not me.
Right.
I can help with some things, but it's the person they're with every day who really needs the skills. And so I would teach the parents and the caregivers the skills for trauma-informed parenting. And that was where I had the most success in that role.
It's good to hear the commitment that the foster families and other folks that make the decision to be a part of that, to introduce these kids into their lives, and
Mm-hmm.
then reaching out when they're struggling instead of saying, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've
Yeah.
seen that happen.
Oh, yeah. So we would have like a wait list sometimes of up to 18 months with our organization because our therapy was paid for by the child welfare system. So they were receiving free services from us, and we would then have to keep notes with the child welfare system and make sure that we were sort of collaborating with the social workers and being almost like a two-way communication there with the social worker and the families, kind of being in the middle of that sometimes. And it was really, like I said, for the most part, most people were very good-hearted and had the right intentions. They just didn't have the skills and they didn't have a lot of time. They were often overwhelmed by the needs of the children, by their own work schedules, their own needs. It was really to see all the pressure those families were under and for them to still take the time to really invest in learning about children's mental health. It was so inspiring to me. It actually inspired me to become a parent. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Because that's a major challenge. I mean, it seems to be no big deal in society. Everybody has kids, but you're raising a human being and yourself, hopefully, you're healthy enough to take care of that child appropriately. And I think that's what happens and why you are involved in these cases because people either aren't prepared
Mm-hmm.
or it's unexpected. And not that anybody wanted to mistreat a child, but if you're in a situation or you have some mental health issues, it happens. And it's
Mm-hmm.
great that organizations like this are there to kind of help with things that happen that kind of break the family. So,
Yeah, it's a lot, but it's necessary.
yeah. Then I see that you are a graduate teaching assistant
Mm-hmm.
at Eastern University, and you're working with through Eastern University now with your current business, right? Or no?
No, so they're not affiliated with one another. That work was really,
Okay.
so my graduate assistant work was me being sort of a mentor to other people who were getting their graduate degree in counseling psychology.
Oh, okay.
They would videotape themselves doing therapy with their practice clients and with their internship clients. And they would send the recording to me, and then I would give them feedback and evaluate, like, this you did really well. Here's some areas that you're really strong in, and then here's some areas where you could improve, and coaching them essentially through the process of doing the actual therapy. Because up until that point, it's all like book knowledge, it's all you're reading and you're writing and you're studying and you're researching, but you're not doing the practice of therapy. And then in the last year of your degree, you're doing the practicing part. And so I was the assistant for that program, that class, those 2 last courses. So that was really interesting too, and fun. And I enjoyed that.
Well, and you're out of the field, you're getting a break from that emotional situation. So
I actually did that while I was at home with my daughter. I was, like I said, doing the in-home therapy, and then I started my own family. I have diabetes, so I could not, and I was insulin dependent while I was pregnant only. I'm not insulin dependent now, but while I was pregnant, I was, and it was causing, I had never been on insulin before. And so it was causing so many highs and so many lows, and
trying to adjust the medications. Yeah.
So towards the end of my pregnancy, it got really complicated and I stopped working. But in the background, I continued. Once I had her, I started working again part-time as the graduate assistant so that I could keep myself in the field still, but also be home with her.
Right. That's good that you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Then you started your own business, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
As a mental health specialist. Is that
right? So that's really the only option they have on LinkedIn for me to choose. But what I did was, as I was thinking about getting back to work, I realized that as a mom to a little one, I wasn't really ready to take on all of that heavy, intense, vicarious trauma of working with children and families with trauma. But I had this idea for a children's book, and I thought, you know what, now's a good time. I'll teach myself how to write a children's book, and I'll teach myself how to publish it, and I'll do that for a while. And so I really thought I was going to stick with writing children's books because I've always loved to write, and I've always wanted to do something like that. But once I published the book, I kept being invited to speak about childhood trauma.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you get those connections?
Let's see. I started my social media accounts. This is in 2019. I started getting online with social media and talking to people and posting things, and it just grew organically over time. And I would reach out to podcasts that I liked and would submit requests to be a guest, and some would turn me down, and obviously many would, and but some I would hear back from. So yeah. That's just kind of how it goes.
That's great.
So I started doing that, and sharing about the book was the purpose. But then I started educating people during these calls and interviews. And I was like, oh, I really like doing that too. And there was such a need for it because shortly after that, the pandemic started and everybody was online. And I was like, well, I have all this helpful information about trauma that I could be sharing with the world. So I started doing online webinars and workshops.
You're right about the timing because there are so many new mental health issues that presented themselves during that time. People are isolated, kids are online at school, families are overwhelmed with all of those things that they're suddenly responsible for and not having any really personal space. Unfortunately, it was just a perfect fit for what you were trying to do. So
yeah, it was definitely like a right time, right place situation. And so I started blogging. That was another thing that really helped get my name out there and sort of get connected with more people. I started writing a blog and sharing that in different Facebook groups and on my own page. I started a website, and so I just started building this business, and it snowballed because there's just such a need for information about how to help children with trauma. And after going through the pandemic, I would say almost all of us have now been through some sort of trauma from that experience. And so and with the children's mental health crisis, it's just, there's not enough people out there educating on these topics that are really important for helping improve our children's mental health. So I did that, and I've been doing it ever since. I've been to different speaking events around the country. I've done workshops all over our country and also internationally. I have people from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Hungary, people from all over the world because you can reach so many people online.
That's so true.
I'm really loving it, and it's filling a need. Like there's a need there that wasn't being filled, and I feel like I'm filling that need.
I think I ran across you on LinkedIn. I never know. It's like you're connected to that person, then you see this, and it's like, oh. And every now and then you run into a crazy person.
Right.
But
True.
um, was your dad in your life, or?
Yes. So my parents divorced when I was 2, and we lived long distances from each other. So I had a little bit of probably, I mean, I don't remember it because it was so long ago. Obviously, you don't really remember before you're 5 years old most of the time. But I do have some early memories of, sadness and fear.
Hmm.
And I think that, probably stems back to the loss of that relationship. Even though I didn't lose him permanently, he wasn't in my everyday life. He lived in New York and we lived in Maine. And so we would see him for holidays and school vacations, but really we weren't in each other's everyday life. So that was a loss and a
It's
bit
a
of,
major change. It's a
yeah,
major stress.
yeah.
You have brothers and sisters, or?
I have one older brother.
Okay.
Him and I were very close, and he was like a very important piece of that puzzle because he really, as being the older brother, I feel like sort of took me in under his wing. And
He nurtured you.
yes, he did. He was very loving and kind
Oh,
to me. Of course, occasional fights here and there, but for the most
well,
part,
of course.
yes, for the most part, I remember him like always taking care, like, Beth, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have all the things? Do you have do you have your books? Do you have your backpack?
Hmm.
He was always checking on me to make sure.
That's sweet. That is sweet, and I'm sure necessary.
Yeah.
He's making sure he's taking care of his sister. You always wonder in these situations, did that stress him out? I'm sure you guys may have talked about it. I don't know. But just the fact that you're in different roles, he is kind of like a semi parent to make sure you're okay.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
far apart are you in age?
3 years. 3.
Okay.
So he was 5 and I was 2 when they split up. Yeah, we had a very, I would say, untraditional mother. So she was not like your typical parent.
Not like Betty Crocker fixed
No.
meals and
No, none of that.
with her
She
little apron on and
No, she was definitely not like that. And I mean, she was amazing in her own ways.
of course.
And we always felt loved by her, and we always felt like we were just like the apple of her eye. But as we got older, we became more like the parent. She was more like the child in a lot of our
Okay.
sort of interactions and choices that she was making with her life. And so it was like we were the two responsible ones, and she was a little more out there, I will say.
Artistic, creative.
Yeah. Yeah, she was different.
Oh,
So yeah, I'm sure, like you said, I'm sure that did have an impact on my brother, feeling like he had to step up and be caretaker for a little sister. I'm glad he was there.
yeah. So many different things I want to touch on because I think when I found you on LinkedIn, what really captivated me was the trauma work you were doing with children. And now, of course, you're, no longer having that direct contact, but you've got so much information, so much education that you're sharing. And, it's amazing how all that kind of happened naturally.
Mm,
And you have to be an empathetic soul to be able to do this work. I truly believe if you're going to do it successfully, there has to be a certain amount of care or nurturing that you're willing to share with these families and trying to see all sides. Has there been like one or two cases that worked out really well? And I know that you don't see them all through, but
mhm,
are there any that you felt like, I think he's going to make it, or
mhm.
I've given him everything I have and it looks like it's working, the family's growing, everybody's
Yeah.
involved and willing to make necessary changes?
Yeah. I feel like the 2 that stand out to me the most are 2 where we were able to see some permanency gained during my time with the families. So one family. It was a child who every time I pulled up to the house, he would take off on his scooter. He did not want to see me. He did not want to meet with me.
See you later.
Yeah, it was like as soon as he'd see me driving down the street, he would take off. And
there's her car.
Yeah, I'm not joking. Like I would literally, I would see him like leaving. It wasn't personal because he literally had never met with me. So it was, it wasn't anything I had done. It was just that he was over it. He was tired of people peering into his life or poking around, and it was enough. He'd already been through enough, and I think he just wasn't in a place to receive another person who might harm him or walk away from him, or
can be overwhelming.
Yeah. And so that started off pretty rocky with that family.
Yeah.
And I really had to be patient because, like I said, he had no interest in meeting with me. And I'm not one to force it. There's no good that can come from that. So I started where I could, and grandma really needed someone to talk to. And so I began building my relationship with her. And the more, I would come each week, and the more she would share and empathize and validate her experiences, because she was really grieving the loss of her retirement years and her time with her family that she had expected to have, and now was raising a young child. So she had a lot on her plate.
Was it a daughter that was no longer the mother, or?
It was a situation where the daughter was in and out of the life of the family. And so we really just bonded. I really was able to bond with the grandmother, and over time I was able to get the grandfather to come to sessions with us. And once that happened, it was a real game changer, because once I could explain to the grandfather what was going on psychologically for the child, it was like grandma needed his approval in order to have a permanent relationship with the child, because they were on the verge of having.
They have to be on the same side. Right. And the child sees that. Kids know that. So
it wasn't a perfect ending, but we were able to get them to a place where they legally had guardianship of him. And when we started out, they called and wanted services because they were going to have him removed from their home and sent to a group home. And it took a year. I mean, it took a year of therapy. But the fact that we went from, I'm going to have my grandson removed from my home, to a legal guardianship situation was just,
oh my gosh.
It was life-changing for the family, and for me to witness that was I always say I got just as much from my clients as they probably got from me, if not more, because being part of that process, it makes you really grateful, for what you have. And I just remember calling my dad one night on my way home from a session with that family, and saying, Dad, thank you so much for always being there for us, and, always helping us financially, and not walking away. And just the gratefulness it would bring up in me was powerful. So, and then another story was where another child who didn't want to meet with us or participate in the therapy, but I was able to meet that relationship with adult caregivers. And this was a child who was going to be aging out, which means they would have turned 18 or 21 without ever having been adopted, and without any legal relationship with a family. And that's what he wanted. He wanted to just be emancipated. Like, he just wanted to be on his own. But underneath, he didn't really want that. And so we were able to get to a place where he was adopted by his aunt and uncle before he turned 18.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. Like you said, he's like, no, I'm ready to go, knowing in his heart that it's not what he wanted, but he didn't think there was going to be another option.
Yeah.
That's so good. People that really are willing to help someone in need, even though, like the grandmother, like you said, the loss of her retirement, her life has changed, but she stuck it out. And then the grandfather, they stuck it out. So I guess at that point, I would think that they see how important they would be for him.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that. Don't know how you do that.
a lot of patience, and
Oh,
really it's listening, it's being supportive and helping people shift their perspectives on children's behavior as from a trauma-informed perspective is really the key. Like once the adults understand that the behavior is not personal, it's not because they hate you or have it
mm-hmm.
out for you or don't like you or don't want to be there. Like once they start to understand where some of these really challenging behaviors stem from, and that they're stemming from pain and hurt and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and overwhelm, that shifts everything. And the biggest challenge, though, is getting the adults to see it and to acknowledge that it's real, and it's really happening. For some reason, I just had a gift for that. And I don't know where it came from, but
Yeah,
it's just a gift.
yeah,
It's just a gift I was given.
yeah. And that is a gift, that you're able to see what's in front of you and then determine what steps need to take place. What's the best thing to do?
Mhm.
Have you been in situations where they needed to be taken out of the foster home or the grandparents' home?
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
figured,
that has happened. Although it was, what would you say? It was much less frequent. 9 times out of 10, I was able to keep the families intact. Not that it was just all me, but, circumstances had shifted and, sort of things had come together beyond just the therapy with me that made it possible for the
mm-hmm,
families to work things through. So I only had one case that disrupted during my 2 years in that role, and that was unusual, I'm sure. I think it probably happens more often than not, and part of the problem is lack of access to services like I was providing. So like I said, there's an 18-month or a year-long wait to get to see somebody like
yeah,
me, and if you can't afford therapy or have access to therapy on your own, then in that year while you're on the waiting list, you may throw your hands up and say, I can't do this anymore.
yeah,
Not because of a lack
yeah,
of love or care, but because you're drowning and you're trying to protect maybe
right.
your own mental health and your own safety.
You're asking for help, and then it comes almost 2 years later.
Right.
It's, I'm sure there are unfortunately situations when it didn't work simply because they didn't know what to do. They asked for the help, they can't get the help.
Exactly.
The work you were doing out in the field. So are those under state regulations? Are there federal regulations as well?
It seems like it's different from state to state. My program that I worked for was defunded about 5 years ago. So it no longer
Mm,
exists. It was defunded by our
wow.
government. So unfortunately now I don't know what's out there in New Jersey for people in those situations because yeah, they defunded it. Even though we had so much success and we had so many people on our wait lists, like for whatever reason they
Mm,
didn't see the value of it, which is insane to me. I can't imagine like
yeah.
how that decision was made, but
And where did that money go? It went to
right.
something else.
Yep.
Oh.
And unfortunately, we put our children and families last in our country. We really don't prioritize children and families. And again, we're backwards in that fact because they are the foundation of our country. If you have
Mm-hmm.
children who are being raised in traumatic situations, those children are going to grow up and eventually be part of our workforce, part of our leadership, part of our
Mm-hmm.
world, or they're going to be incarcerated or in homeless
Right.
shelters or committing
Right.
crimes, addiction. And there's lots of terrible outcomes for children in these situations. And it's because of how they were treated and the lack of priority that we gave to them as young children. We're really just doing a terrible job at protecting our children in our country.
Yeah, it would be life changing. That's why in reading some of your posts, when you talked about how children, people say that at a certain age, oh, they won't remember, they won't know.
Mm.
That's just not true. And I loved seeing that because you always hear just the opposite.
Oh,
I remember things, as a kid, and I'm a very curious person. So I've had my childhood trauma and then discovering it later in life. But I was so curious about different things that I think that helped me because, say, that system was available then. I was still unconscious about it, so nobody could do anything. And I'm sure that's really rare that you have a kid that has no clue, but they're suffering. So I just find it so purposeful to inform people about that.
Thank you. That's one of the biggest myths I'm trying to bust. The biggest myth I want to bust in my lifetime. Well, I have two, but that is the first one, is that children don't remember with narrative timelines of stories, but it's all held in their brain and their body subconsciously, and it comes out through their behaviors usually.
Yes.
Or through their anxiety and their fears or their sadness and depression. It's all connected back to what we go through usually early in life, when your brain is just so malleable and so much is happening. And if you don't have the support that you need through that, it stays with you. And just because you can't tell a story about it doesn't mean that your body doesn't remember what happened.
In part 2, Beth and I discussed the importance of therapy and how to avoid those that are not properly licensed. And we talk about kids aging out and an amazing system that can help kids connect with their families.
Thank you for joining me today on Living in Midbloom. I hope you found this episode insightful, meaningful, and maybe it's given you something to think about. I invite you to share your positive reviews or ideas on topics you would like me to touch on by leaving your comments on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Podchaser, or Podcast Addict. We are all divine beings who just want to be seen, heard, and loved. Have a beautiful day.